Okay, so here's a 22-year-old married male, decorated veteran of OIF and OEF. He was fired during probation for chronically lying about his military exploits and injuries. So this was a guy who would tell everybody that he has 270 fragments of bullets and bombs and other metal debris in his body. He has 0. He tells people that he's burned over 80% of the part of his body that you can't see. None of these things are true. None of them are true. So his field training officers and his sergeant and lieutenant of the training division meet with him and say, dude, I don't know what kind of problems you've got, but knock it off. This is totally inappropriate. You know, we don't want to hear any more about this crazy stuff. In fact, would you please open up your shirt and show us some of these burn marks? No, I don't have any. I don't know why I said that. All right, well, get some help, go to the Employee Assistance Program, whatever, but knock it off. He didn't knock it off. He kept doing it, and so they let him go. Now, this is a person that I had found qualified. This was one of my blunders. This was a mistake of mine. And it's the same thing that we were talking about this morning that we sometimes do. He's a decorated soldier. This guy has a Medal of Valor. He's a nice guy. He's a war hero. I liked the guy. I felt bad for him, and I was grateful to him for his service. He's got a fake good index on the CPI. How many of you ever used the FG index? It's a really powerful index on the CPI. He's at a 62.54. 2 standard deviations is 60.6, and only 7.5 of applicants are above that. He's about another 3/4 of a standard deviation above that. This guy's in rare air with a 62.54. He has a GI minus CM gap of 80 to 51, so what is it, 29? That's high. His FG scale is, his GI scale is at, oh, this is the PAI, isn't it? Yeah, this is the PAI. But in addition to this PIM score, which is 77 community and 66 incumbent. Normally you'd have a 63 cut for community. He's already at 66 for incumbent, which is going to be lower. So it's very, very high positive impression management scale, very high fake good scale, very high GI scale. So, you know, I write down here 61 and 46 for incumbents instead of 80-51. In other words, I'm trying to mitigate it. I'm trying to say, yeah, but it's not that bad relative to police applicants. Yeah, you know, he's a nice guy. He's a hero. I'm making excuses for this guy. And it's a fellow who clearly has some self-doubt problems, who has some, he's wounded in a number of ways. Physically doesn't happen to be one of them.
But that's the only way you can talk about.
That's the only way you can talk about it. So I made excuses for him, and here we are. He didn't make it.
Dave, do you have the CPI on your screen?
I don't think I brought that one along, Mike.
Okay, but I guess the point is that you had enough information to raise concerns at your pre-offer level, and you let him through, right?
I did. I should have rated him as indeterminable in the beginning.
Right.
And indeterminable is a category that I use at the pre-offer and post-offer stage when the test results are so defensive, I cannot make a reliable determination. And I'm not going to pretend that the person is qualified, and I'm not going to pretend they're unqualified. The answer is, I don't know because the person isn't giving me enough real data for me to rely upon.
Excuse me.
Yes.
That designation, indeterminable, means you don't pass or fail them.
No, it means that they don't get a qualified rating, so they are unqualified. Indeterminable means they're unqualified. Tie doesn't go to the runner.
But you are not using the word disqualified.
I am using the word unqualified. They're unqualified because the test results are unreliable because of the person's failure to provide reliable responses.
I thought you were
Yes.
clearing them.
Do you do that with invalid tests? Is that the
Well,
final
yeah, although
you
I think the concept of invalid tests is a bit of a misnomer. They're valid. You can interpret the validity scales. But I think the better way to view it is that the validity scales don't permit you to draw conclusions based upon the absence of elevations.
Right, so what I'm saying is, are you using those inconclusive test scores to be one of the findings that make him an indeterminable, therefore disqualified applicant?
Yes.
Do you ever use just the test findings for that? In other words, do you DQ an inconclusive test only applicant?
Well, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you
But if
repeat the question?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's such a hard habit to get into. The question is, do I disqualify candidates based solely on test results that show this extraordinarily defensive pattern? Yes, when it exists across instruments.
And
If you have an elevated, let's say I'm doing it all post-opera, and you have a 63, 64 FGI, Fate Good Index. You have an 81 GI score. You have a communality score that is 30 or more points below that. You have a PIM score against incumbent norms that's 66 and higher. You have a raw of 10 on the L or LR. I don't know what the hell to make of this guy.
And
But
the
you-
poly's
Now,
good, and the background's good?
No, we don't have poly.
Okay, background's good, in your clinical interview, you don't find anything?
No, I'm saying it's indeterminable. I can't draw, the conclusions that you would draw from low scores don't apply to this person. They just don't apply. I can't rely upon those test scores as being indicative. So what happens is when we pass these people is we allow a person who's trying to beat the test to have a free pass. And I can't. It's not my responsibility to say let the training division sort it out during field training. The responsibility of the applicant is to produce test results that are reliable. Yes.
so, I just want to get clear, is that across the board? In other words, if you saw 10 tests that look the same,
Yep.
and 10 people that look terrific
Yes.
with those tests, you would disqualify all 10? There's nothing that would mitigate that?
The question is there anything that would mitigate those kind of test results that I just described? Absolutely not. No. Yes.
Do you give them an opportunity to repeat the test?
No, I don't give them an opportunity to repeat the test because here's what you're going to get almost every time. You're going to get the reverse.
Yeah.
You're going to get now elevated scores on the clinical scales. You're going to get a K score which is almost 0. You're going to get an L score which is quite low. You might get elevated F at that point because this person knows, okay, that didn't work, so I'm admitting to everything.
Right.
No, it doesn't work. And there's no basis for believing that the second test is more reliable than the first. The first test is a reliable indication of what? A reliable indication of a strong level of naivete or defensiveness at the very least. Now, I'm not talking about L scales that are slightly outside of normal limits. I'm talking about validity scales on all of the measures. If I have a low PIM and a high L, that's an interesting finding. But I'm not going to conclude from that the results are indeterminable, because they contradict one another. So whatever is operational on the MMPI-2 RF to produce an LR of 10, but a PIM that is 52, that's not a person who is trying to beat the test. Yes.
Just to confuse this further, before before we had to test them all,
Yes.
and I worked for a large
You
department.
mean the good old days?
The good old days.
Yeah.
Worked for a large department, that the way they did it is if the background was clear,
Yeah.
88.
Right.
If the background was clear,
Okay.
and the background investigator has no concerns, they would send him for testing. If the testing was okay, they didn't have to have an interview.
But you know, the statement was that in the the pre-ADA days, if the background was clear, they would just bring them on.
Right, there's a piece that also is missing, is that the background investigator would tell that to them.
Right, the background investigator would tell that to them. But here's the problem that I have with this notion of the background being clear. We're talking about these as if they're a monolithic, a singular concept, that all background investigations are equal. And that somehow, if a background investigation is clear, that that's evidence that the person is problem-free. What's the basis for that belief?
Right. But I guess I was also saying is that they compounded the problem by saying to them, if your psych tests look good,
Yes,
you
I
don't
agree.
have to have an interview,
Yeah.
so that Ellen K
Yeah, but
went
that's
all
not
the way
true.
up.
That's not true today, but it is
Right.
true, yes, talking about being told that if your psych tests look good, then you'll proceed. Yes, Joe?
Not that I dispute your approach here, but this is a job application, and people are highly motivated for a number of reasons to dissimulate in a positive manner.
Yes, Joe's point is absolutely well taken. I think there's good reason to believe that. The point that Joe's making is that dissimulation is common in applicant pools because of the motivation to look good.
And not just police applicants.
Not just police applicants, but even relative to police norms, Joe, these people are falling significantly outside normal limits. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about they're within normal limits for police applicants. They are significantly outside normal limits for both community and police applicants. So I'm drawing the line at a very generous rate. I'm saying they're outside normal limits for both community and applicant norms. When that's the case, what are we going to do with these test results?